Professor Davis?
Yes.
Kinley wanted me to let you know that she might be 10 minutes late. She's stuck at a doctor's appointment.
Okay, thanks for letting me know.
You're welcome.
All right. Hi there, Avian Science. Welcome to the last lecture of the semester. Yeah, this is kind of an easy find the hidden animal one, but it is really cute. So I thought this was a good one to kind of end the semester on. If you couldn't see it, there's a little lovebird. Okay, reminder, I'm going to post some short answer questions this afternoon. And there is a review quiz already up. Both of those are due Sunday before midnight so that I can get the grading done and get your grades in as soon as possible. There is no final. It's just some short answer questions and that's it. Okay, we've been talking about bird banding. And I've talked about capturing birds, but I didn't talk about how that's done. So there are lots of different ways that this can happen. The most common one is what you see up here at the top. That is what is called a mist net. Generally speaking, this is going to be put up somewhere in a flight path for birds. One of the best places to put it up is in a road through some shrubby habitat or forested habitat, preferably shrubbier, so the birds moving from this shrubby area to that just kind of fly right into the net. So they can either get their feet tangled in the netting or they can fall down and you really can't see it very well, but there's basically little pockets all along here. And if the birds hit the net and then fall downward, they get trapped in one of those pockets. Mist nets have to be monitored on a very frequent time period. So, you know, like every 10 minutes, somebody will walk the net and start collecting the birds. And when you collect the birds, you untangle them carefully from the net and then you put them in a bag. I've seen people use paper bags. I've seen people use cloth bags like this. And basically, you're muffling all of the visual and auditory and olfactory input that the birds might be detecting. And you just kind of, you know, hang them up. You don't want to lay the bag down because if the bird moves around too much, it could fall off a table. And we don't want it on the floor because it could be stepped on. When you're in a bird banding station, the general rule is, especially if you've got lots of birds in it, minimal talking, no wearing of strong perfumes, no Axe body spray, and just, you know, very, very, very quiet to keep their stress level down. So that's a mist net, and that is probably the most common tool used to capture birds. We can also have, not shown, sparrow traps, which are basically a metal trap that the sparrow figures out how to get into, but then can't always figure out how to get out. So sparrow traps work for a lot, well, sparrows, that's what they're named after. They also work well for things like cowbirds. And they generally have a tunnel that the bird has to go through to get into the trap. And they want to go in because there's food. And the tunnel is kind of cone shaped. So the opening on the outside is larger than the opening on the inside. So the birds go in, but then the opening to get back out is much, much smaller. Some species of birds don't have a problem with this and they can get out fine, but sparrows and, like I said, cowbirds, they tend to get in and get stuck. These devices, mist nets, sparrow traps, and a couple of other things I'm going to mention are designed not to hurt birds. We want to minimize their stress, and we certainly don't want to injure them. When I was helping do some gull research, they designed gull traps. Gull traps are very simple. They're basically a metal frame or a metal box that's open on one side. It's almost exactly a cube. And you put it over the bird's nest so that the opening is on one side. The bird will come into the nest site, and then you either pull a rope to flatten the trap, or shift the trap so that it's the open side is down, or you run up. More commonly, you run up and you move the trap so that the open side is down. It is a little stressful for the gulls, but running up is least likely for them to get out. And when you're talking about larger birds, it can be really tricky to catch them. Hawks generally are caught by hand, believe it or not. There'll be what's called a blind. A bird blind is a wooden box that a person goes in, and it'll have window slits. And if you're trying to catch raptors, it'll have an opening in the top, and you put a prey item like a dead rat or a dead squirrel right there near the opening on the top of the box. The bird comes down to grab the prey. The prey is attached to the box so they can't fly off immediately. And whoever is inside just reaches up and grabs the legs. It actually works. And then hummingbirds. Hummingbird traps are, again, we're using food. We hang hummingbird feeders. Again, it's a metal box, basically. And these have a door on one side. You hang the trap towards the top of the cage, and you want the opening into the cage to be near the bottom, because hummingbirds tend to fly up. So the hummingbird will come in, it'll fly up to the feeder, and then you either manually close the door or use a remote control to close the door. Hummingbirds can also be caught in mist nets. If you're trying to trap lots and lots of hummingbirds and you're in an area with lots of them, like during winter time when they're all in Central America, mist nets can work, but hummingbird traps can also work really good if you've got smaller population sizes. So that's how we're catching the birds. I haven't talked about how to catch some other types of birds, things like herons and egrets. It's much more difficult to devise a trap method to catch those birds. Generally, those are going to be banded on the nest, and they're going to be banded before they leave the nest. So that's generally how those birds get banded. And we do a lot of data collection on these birds. Your permit will tell you if you're allowed to take a blood sample or a feather sample. But what you always are going to do is you're going to take measurements. You're going to measure wing length, how much the bird weighs, how long is the beak and the head, how worn are the feathers. Oh, Ronit wants to know how you band ray tights. Yeah. I don't actually know that I've ever heard of anybody who did a study where they banded ray tights. I know somebody who tried to do a study on ostrich parenting behavior, and it was an absolute disaster because they weren't banded. And it turns out that if you, they're very flexible with their parenting. So if you've got a pair of ostrich and they've got a bunch of chicks. So first off, when they nest, generally one female will sit on the nest, but other females will come and lay eggs on that nest. So a clutch that's hatched may be totally unrelated to each other. If a pair of ostriches comes up to another pair of ostriches and they all have chicks, when they, they might feed together for a while and then move off, and the chicks just follow whichever parent they spot. So they don't necessarily stick with one parent. So it's crazy town in ray tight breeding circles. It's absolute, anything goes for those guys. Okay, so you might also look at things like feather wear, how worn out the feathers are. And you look for this. This is a brood patch. Come on. When birds are nesting, the individuals who are going to sit on either the eggs or the nestling will lose their feathers on their belly. Now, they still have some of the longer feathers. So when they're flying and moving around, you don't see that brood patch. But when they sit down, they don't have that downy underlayer. So that area, that bare area there, provides a better way to transmit warmth from the parent bird to the eggs or the nestling. So it's really important for helping them stay warm. The feathers just come off due to hormones. So they don't actually pluck them themselves. When we take blood or feather samples, we get information. I think I've mentioned this, diseases, genetics, who's breeding with who. Yes, this over here is me taking measurements of this gull that we caught. So that was on a place called Appledore Island. I think the program is still going on there. I used to know the person who was doing most of the research on the island, and she would often take out community college students with her. But she is now no longer teaching at community colleges, and I don't know if she's still doing the banding work. But if you want to look at, this is the name of I can't remember the name of the research station on Appledore. They do sometimes allow college students, including community college students, to come out and do some work. Most of the college students come from Cornell. But like I said, the goal work, the woman was really trying to get community college level students specifically. And like I said, I'm not sure if she's at it again, but you can do some Googling. Her name was Sarah, or is Sarah. So do some Googling, and if she's still in charge, it's not so much a field trip, it is you're going to be staying there for a while. You have to stay on the island. There's not a regular shuttle to it. It's not a island that tourists go to. Yeah. And the facilities there, there are cabins, which are a little dusty. They're not kept very clean. If you work with the gulls, you get more showers than other research groups, but you are limited to how much water you can use because they literally have to bring fresh water in by boat. All right. Okay, so if you're at a bird banding station, you have to keep detailed records. Bands used, bands found, all of the measurements. You can find some of this information at the federal USGS Bird Banding Lab website. There's not a lot of details available on there, but you can find out where a bird was banded, where it was captured again, where it was recovered. If you ever find a banded bird, you can report it and then find out from the USGS, where was it banded originally? When was it banded originally? And some kind of information like that. I did mention the rate of return is very low. Songbirds can be less than 1%. Ducks in particular can be more than 10%. Generally speaking, any species that gets hunted, you're going to have a higher rate of return. And I know we talked about that. All right. If you're interested in doing some banding, but you don't want to spend a week out on an island, oh, Ronit found the link. Thank you, Ronit. Audubon Sanctuary at Joppa Flats has a bird banding station. And during migration season in the spring and fall, they sometimes have visitor hours, and sometimes they have volunteer opportunities. So check out the bird banding at Joppa Flats as well. Okay, any questions on bird banding and bird research? Okay. In that case, let's talk a little bit about falconry. So you can see this here is a golden eagle. It's kind of a big bird, but those are sometimes used in falconry. So when we talk about falconry, we're talking about hunting using birds of prey. Generally speaking, the groups that you're going to see are hawks, eagles, falcons, and owls. Not so many owls, but that kind of is a subspecialty of falconry. This is not going to include all kinds of species that hunt for food. So it's not going to include gulls and storks and penguins. They all hunt for food, but they are not used in falconry. Generally, what we're looking for is birds with good eyesight. Remember, birds have better eyesight than we do, so it's the bird species that have the best eyesight. Strong feet, so that they can grab prey better. And they have to be trained, obviously, not to eat the prey species. Instead, they bring the prey back to the falcon. So this is, I will tell you, this is a smaller deer species. It's not an elk or a moose, but it's not that tiny. And this eagle is taking it down. And they certainly can do that. They can take down huge amounts or huge prey compared to what you would expect. Ronit, go ahead.
Fishing with cormorants, that's not included under falconry in terms of regulation and such. Is that correct?
That is correct. Fishing with cormorants is a totally different thing than falconry. As far as I know, nobody in the US does that. It's certainly not a big thing in most of the world, whereas falconry is kind of a US, Europe, Asia, really common in those sorts of areas. The people who fish with cormorants are doing it to make a living. People who do falconry, it's usually a hobby these days. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the major types of birds that are used in falconry. So eagles are the status bird of falconry, pretty much. When we talk about these, they're very large. They have long, broad, powerful wings, massive feet. You can see this is I'm pretty sure that's a golden eagle foot here with these incredibly long talons. You don't want to get grabbed by a golden eagle. They can put a hurt on you. I've heard that their talons are so strong that even if you've got a falconry glove on, they can, if they get pissed off and they grab hard, that those talons can go through the falconry gloves. When we talk,
they are designed to go through animal hides.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. The process of making leather makes it a little tougher than an animal hide on a living animal, however. But even so, they can get through it. Bald eagles are not usually used. If they're taking down prey, they're largely taking down fish. So we call them piscivores. Piscivores is eating fish. They also eat a lot of carrion. They can swim, but in the US, it's illegal to use them. And in the rest of the world, pretty much because they're not considered a good falconry bird, because they aren't going to take down the kinds of things that people are trying to hunt with falconry. They're not as big into going after rabbits and squirrels and ducks and pheasants and that sort of thing. The golden eagle is used frequently. In the US, you can also use the white-tailed eagle and Steller's sea eagle. White-tailed and Stellers are not native to the US. Even so, there are limitations on how many you can have as a falconer. Golden eagles, because they are native, there are limitations on how many of those can be used as falconry birds across the board, not by an individual, but limits on the total number that can be used in falconry. So golden eagles tend to be allocated by state governments. So the state government will go, we have 2 permits for golden eagles. The only people who can use eagles are people who have are considered master falconers. This we'll talk about a little bit later, but it takes 7 years of training at a minimum and a written test before you get called a master falconer. And they are the only ones allowed to have eagles. And in the US, a maximum of 3 eagles. Now, when we talk about hawks, there are 2 categories of hawks. Accipiters, which is on the left, that is a Cooper's hawk, and Bootios, which is on the right, and that is a red-tailed hawk. So accipiters tend to be relatively slim, streamlined. They often hunt small songbirds. So these guys are something you might see attack birds in your backyard at your bird feeder. Most species of accipiter are not used in falconry. They tend to be flighty, nervous, high-stress birds. So I don't have a picture here, but the accipiter that's most commonly used is the goshawk, which is a large accipiter. It's a very fast, powerful, highly successful hunters. And they'll take rabbits, pheasants, ducks, geese, ground birds like quail, and they are temperamental. So they're not the easiest birds to work with. When we talk about Bootios, Bootios tend to be kind of what we would call a medium-sized bird. They're pretty solid, right? They look a little, almost not, well, compared to the accipiter, they look chunky. They're not really. They have broad, powerful wings. When we think about Bootios, the red-tailed hawk is the most likely one that you're going to see. They are doing pretty well in the wild. If you see a bird sitting on a light post or a power pole, most of the time it's a red-tailed hawk. Occasionally you'll see another Bootio. In Massachusetts, you might see red-shouldered hawks. So the most commonly used birds are the red-tailed hawk and the Harris's hawk. I haven't worked with Harris's hawks, and I haven't done falconry, but red tails I've worked with in rehab, and they are easy to deal with, very easy to deal with. They're low stress, so that's good. They will take rabbits and squirrels, and both of these can hunt by circling and spotting prey from on the wing. So if you see birds circling, we have vultures will do that, and then these 2 Bootios will do that. That's the majority of the raptor type birds that you're going to see circling in Massachusetts. Red-tailed hawks tend to be very calm in captivity. They will bond with people and are less likely to take off and not return. So they have they'll come back to the glove. They tend not to say, sayonara, I'm out of here. Harris's hawks are also pretty easygoing. They are very successful when they're hunting. And this group of hawks is unusual because they are very social in the wild. So this sociality really helps them adapt to captivity. And again, they're more likely to come back than some of the other species. And then we can talk about falcons. And when we talk about falcons, I'm going to divide this conversation up into two major groups. We're going to talk about kestrels, and then we're going to talk about the big falcons. Because kestrels, they're little birds. Not much bigger than a blue jay. They're so cute. They have long pointed wings. They are very swift flyers. And a lot of falcons are popular in falconry. They have quick flight, so it's beautiful to watch them fly, and they have a high degree of determination. In my experience, kestrels are also incredibly curious birds. So if I was ever doing falconry, I love kestrels. I just love their personalities. Kestrels are very much, however, a hobby bird. They're not going to be taking down a rabbit that you can then stew for dinner. They're, they catch insects and mice and not anything bigger than a mouse. And a mouse doesn't make very much of a meal for a person. So the other end of the spectrum, this is a peregrine falcon. So there's a peregrine and there's a gyre falcon, which is even bigger than a peregrine. These are the big ones. Peregrine falcons, I think we already know a lot about these guys. Average flight speed is over 40 miles an hour, and diving speed can reach at least 240 miles an hour. That's the fastest ever recorded. Peregrine falcons like to take ducks, so they're very they adapt well to falconry, and they do well. Wild peregrines are actually doing pretty well. In addition, they are adapting to city living. Traditionally, peregrines nest on cliffs, and as far as they're concerned, high buildings, same thing as a cliff. And since they take down squirrels, most people are pretty happy to have those around in the big cities. The gyre falcon, should I lift over there? Hang on, I misspelled that one. Let me fix that. The gyre falcon is a very determined hunter. They will chase their prey for miles, and then will often catch them in midair. They're very athletic and graceful birds. So when we talk about falcons, and we talked about kestrels.
Diana?
Yes.
Is the pursuing for miles a chase or more like stalking?
A chase.
What are they chasing?
Things like ducks in flight, maybe pigeons in flight. Okay. So I said kestrels don't take very big prey. They are used to deal with pest species like English sparrows and European starlings. They're very good about returning, but they can get chunky. So you have to monitor the weight of the kestrels very, very carefully. And I mentioned owls. So this is definitely a bit of a niche hobby within falconry. And yes, falconry birds are often used to scare birds away from airports. Yep. Must be a lot of fun. I think that would be a lot of fun to watch. Okay, so owls are less popular because they're nocturnal. Most humans are not. You can't see very much at night. They come in a large range of sizes, however, this is a great horned owl. Great horned owls are massive birds, very powerful birds. Those are the ones that they can take rabbits, they can take feral cats. You know, they can take some pretty big prey, but then there's something like this guy, which is a screech owl. And screech owls are, yeah, maybe 6 to 8 inches tall. So they're pretty small. Jessica put a cute comment in the chat about going to a water park where they were using falcons to keep the seagulls away from the wave pool. That's funny. This is an eagle owl, not an eagle owl, sorry. A sea eagle. So these guys are massive.
Isn't it a harpy eagle? It says harpy eagle at the bottom of the page.
Oh,
I was going to say that looks, I was
like
going to
a
ask
harpy.
whether they looked really similar to harpy
okay.
eagles.
You got me. I misidentified it. Yes, that's a harpy. They're not native around here in the US, so I don't recognize them. I don't know all 10,000 bird species by sight.
It's okay, neither do we.
Other types of birds like kites that are considered birds of prey, or vultures that sometimes get lumped into birds of prey, they're not really used very much in falconry. I want to remind you guys, most raptors or birds of prey, the female is larger. So if you want a large bird, you're going to be looking for a female. Larger birds have larger clutch sizes. They have more babies. I like this image because, you know, this is one of the biggest birds that you can use in falconry. And here we have somebody who doesn't fit the stereotype of a falconry person. If you're interested in falconry, it has traditionally been a male-dominated sport that has not been very female-friendly. It's getting better, like a lot of things, but there's still pockets of that snobbery, and not just between males and females, but also who has the better birds. So obviously, if you do falconry with an eagle, but you're somehow superior to people who do falconry with the kestrel. Yeah, you know, status and snobbery go. Okay, so how do you get a falcon? Well, you don't, but if you trained and gotten a falconry permit, there are 2 ways to get birds for falconry. There is domestic breeding. And domestic breeding can provide you with exotic species that aren't native to your area, and they also sometimes do hybrids. So peregrine falcon, Harris hawk hybrid is a popular one. So you get some of the best of both worlds. Traditionally, wild birds were captured in their first year. This still happens to some degree. There are still some falconers who will go out, find a nest, and basically remove a nestling. Obviously, there are some ethical concerns here. Some of the falconers who prefer wild-born birds will try to find injured or sick birds, help them heal, and then use them for falconry for a while. The advantage to that is they can eventually, first off, you've got an injured or sick bird that's brought back to health. The other advantage to that is if the bird escapes, it's already been in the wild, it's native to the local area. And if you get out of the hobby, you can release the bird. There's still some concerns about that because birds that have been falconry birds tend to be more comfortable with people. And when we're talking about something that has, you know, inch-long talons or 3-inch-long talons, you don't necessarily want those to be comfortable around people. So bringing in birds from the wild is going to be more limited than getting domestically bred ones. If you do get an exotic or a hybrid, I've mentioned lost birds a couple of times. I tried to get some good, accurate information on how many birds that are used for falconry take off and don't come back. And it's nearly impossible. Well, okay, I was not able to find any information on this, or I wasn't able to find any information on it that I trusted, because you basically have the information on falconry comes from two groups: falconry people and people who think that falconry should be illegal. So they both have information, but they both also have biases and kind of an agenda, right? Falconry groups don't want to admit if birds get lost frequently, especially if they're exotic species that are not native to the area. Because anytime you introduce an exotic, there's a risk that it will hybridize with local species or compete with local species. And of course, the anti-falconry groups want to bump up the numbers of lost birds to make it seem like falconry is a horrible thing and we should not be doing it. As always, there's probably, the truth is probably somewhere in between. There are probably some people who do falconry very ethically and very well, and some people who do it very bad. And the number of birds that escape, probably somewhere in the middle. There is no evidence that I was able to find that escaped non-native falconry birds and escaped hybrid falconry birds have caused any problems. Generally speaking, this is a hobby for rich people who have a lot of money and a lot of time, and there aren't a lot of birds in captivity for this hobby. So we're not likely to have large numbers of birds being released or escaped. And Modern falconry often uses GPS or telemetry. So a little GPS pack on the bird to help find lost birds. Falconry organizations are aware of the concerns, and a lot of those would like you to report any possible falconry birds that you see in the wild. So if you see a bird wearing falconry gear, find your local falconry group and report it. It may be a lost bird. It may have been somebody flying at that point in time. There has been a long, long history of falconry. So the early falconers were using their birds to get meat to supplement their own diets, especially in harsh climates where it's harder to hunt. Nowadays, in some parts of the world, they're still used to help supplement the food, but in most places, it's just a hobby. We know that falconry existed and was relatively widespread 4,000 years ago in 2000 BCE. We know that by this time it was in Mongolia, the Middle East, and Europe. We don't know where it started. There's some evidence that in the Middle East, in an area that we now know as Iran, that a king was using birds of prey in falconry as early as 10,000 years ago. But that's like little tiny piece of evidence and then nothing until 4,000 years ago. So it's not clear exactly if that was actually going on. Traditionally, falconry was done by men of high status. Women of high status might be allowed to use kestrels, traditionally speaking, but men would use the larger birds. In the Middle Ages, in Europe, wealthy landowners and nobility would hunt with falconry birds in the winter to bring to get food for the table. So their family and their servants and that sort of stuff would be able to get food. Not surprisingly, there are a lot of laws about falconry birds. We need hunting license. We need, if you're wanting to get started in falconry, you need a sponsor who is already a falconer. There are limits on numbers of birds and species that can be kept. And these limits are going to vary based on the experience of the falconer. So more experienced falconers can have more challenging birds, larger bird species, birds that are maybe a little less common in the wild than we would like to see. And of course, you're going to have state level requirements as well. So how do you get a falconry permit? You need to train under someone with a master falconry permit for it. falconer for at least 2 years and pass a written test. To be a master falconer, at least 7 years of experience. And this is a Harris's hawk right here. Beautiful birds. This is also a Harris's hawk. To do falconry, these birds require daily care, including regular flying outside. So you have to have an area where it's safe. You don't want to go somewhere where there's hunting. You don't want to go somewhere where the bird might get entangled in power lines. You don't want to go somewhere where anything they catch might be poisoned. So rodenticides, remember, they don't kill mice and rats right away. Mice and rats go outside. So you want to be careful of this. And you don't want to interfere too much with the native wild birds. It can be tricky during breeding season because if you've got a male bird and there are females around and his hormones are going crazy because it's spring, he might decide not to come back. All of the birds used in falconry are carnivores. They have to eat meat, preferably whole animals. So you can't just go to the grocery store and get chicken breast and chop that up. They need specific nutrients that are in the organs of their prey, including the brains. When we talk about equipment that you need a falconry glove, which is a thick leather glove reinforced on the top side where the bird's going to sit. You need jesses, which are these long leather straps hanging down from this bird here. This one also has bells on the jesses. That's pretty common. The jesses need basically when the bird is not in a cage, but maybe you've got them sitting outside to get some sunshine. They need to be on a tether, basically, which is a leash-like structure that's attached to the jesses. You can also have a leash that attaches to the glove if you've got the bird on your hand. You need a hood. You need training lures. This is one that uses wings from a grouse. And you literally will do things like swing it around. It helps when you're when you're exercising the bird, you swing something around and then they chase it to catch it. Even better is if you've got two people and they catch the lure, you give them a treat, and then the other person starts spinning a lure, further away to get them to fly back and forth. And of course, training. They've got to get used to people. They've got to be trained to come back. They have to be trained to hunt and not eat dinner. Okay, so that's basically falconry. It's a lot of work. It's expensive. We're talking thousands of dollars. And it's something that people often think would be a fun hobby, but like I said, there's a lot that has to go into it. And I am done. Does anybody have questions about falconry or any other bird-related topics?
What are the bells for?
The bells are to help you find the bird when they are in thick brush.
Does it not scare away prey?
No, it generally doesn't. Wild animals don't recognize the bell as the sound that a predator is coming. That's also why they don't work on cat collars. Yes, Laura, it is costly. I agree, it sounds cool, but costly and time consuming. Absolutely. Anything else? Guys are done for the semester? All right, in that case, we're done. I'll post the last assignment in an hour or two, and that's it. You guys are free to go.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Professor, I have a question. Do you know what my final grade is, or should I go look at that?
Let me pull up my grade book real quick. I don't have your final grade.
And Jess was wondering if we get grades for our projects.
Yes, you will get grades for your projects. I have to record those.
You're welcome,
Hang on a
Jess.
second. I want to stop the recording, so.